Hello Chain Gang, welcome back to the 4 Chains and Top 5 Friday. We didn't put out a video last week, we had some obligations to our Patreon community, but this week we are making up for it in giving you 2 lists in one. We are going to do both the 5 worst Rock and Roll Hall of Fame snubs, and to make room for those snubs, we are going to do the top 5 worst inductee decisions, because I think that that's how all snub lists should do. You know, you see that all the time with every year when an all-star team or an all-pro team or whatever is announced in sports. People get on these sports shows, these talking heads, and they talk about these outrageous snubs. But what they don't do is acknowledge that there's only a specific amount of slots that need to be filled. So if you're announcing somebody that should be on the all-star team, you really, to be integral about it, you should be announcing somebody who should not be on it to make room. One list we're never going to do is the top 5 worst Hall of Fames, because it is so obvious. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is by far the worst Hall of Fame. I don't mean in terms of visiting the facility before you jump in. Maybe that's an enjoyable place to be with all those musical artists. I mean in terms of the selection process. It is terrible. Essentially, it's just a list of people. Jan Wenner, the longtime editor-in-chief of Rolling Stone magazine, it's a list of people he likes. There is a voting committee, but they only get to vote on the nominations of the nominating committee, and the nominating committee is Jan Wenner and his friends, people that think the exact same way that he does. And this process has produced some absolute terrible decisions, and there's been a lot of backlash, and they kind of let fans give their input, but it doesn't appear to have fixed the situation. So let's start with number 5. Number 5 is the only person on this list that everybody has heard of. And it is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and so fame should be a criteria. I definitely agree with that, and this person is famous. But I tried to go online and look at the criteria. There's not really official criteria. Jan Wenner's talked about it several times, but in every article that I look at, the criteria is different. So I sort of combined all those articles to, it's, you know, Hall of Fame, so fame, the success of your music career, obviously, the amount of people that buy your records and listen to your records. He stated many times that longevity of that career is important, and I certainly agree with that. And then influence on other artists. That sounds good. But in reality, the 2 biggest criteria are being a friend of Jan Wenner, and then if not that, you can still get in posthumously if you die tragically at a young age, and that's what happened with number 5, which is Ritchie Valens. Okay, you might think at first, well, Ritchie Valens should be in the Hall of Fame, but should he? He's famous. He's indirectly referenced in the song American Pie. They made a movie about him, and I think that's the only reason you've heard about it, because La Bamba was a great movie, but it wasn't a huge hit. It has had staying power because of that movie, and it is tragic how he died early. But let's look at what I think should be the 2 most important statistics, which are the success of your career and the longevity of your career, and he has almost none of both. His first top 40 hit was in November of 1958. His second and final top 40 hit was a month later in December of 1958. Ritchie Valens had a shorter and less successful career than Debbie Gibson or Tiffany. Does that mean Debbie Gibson or Tiffany should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? No, I am definitely not saying that. But how about Foreigner? I want to do Foreigner right off the bat because when I'm going to tell you the 5 acts that I think should be in there instead of these other 5, it's not my 5 favorite acts that aren't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't like Foreigner. In particular, I'm not a fan of their syrupy ballads. But it's not a personal preference thing. I get it. They only had one #1 hit, but Richie Valens had 0 #1 hits. Waiting for a Girl Like You is either their biggest or second biggest song. That was #2 for 10 weeks. It just happened to run into Physical, Olivia Newton-John, which is one of those weird things. The other thing is, when you look at a list of the hits that Foreigner has, they spanned over a decade, and they still get lots of radio play. So Foreigner may not be the Beatles, but they certainly deserve to be in over Richie Valens. Now it's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where we're going to get progressively less famous. #4 is Patti Smith. I've heard it pronounced Smythe, but it's spelled Smith. I'm going to ask a question about all of these artists. Like, what's your third favorite Richie Valens song? What's your third favorite Patti Smith song? Patti is personal friends with Jan, so that got her in. She's still with us, but she is good friends with him. She's not just as an artist, like he's interviewed her for the magazine and he likes her. They've hung out personally. You can see that in her books, and her books are her main source of fame. I've read 3 of her books. One of them is called Just Kids, and it's profoundly great. It won the National Book Award. But I do recall that Just Kids spends a lot of time talking about her hanging out with a ton of musicians that are now voters for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She is a great novel writer. Her songwriting is not quite as rewarded. She has one song that you've heard of. It's called Because the Night, and it's a great song. It reached #13, but that's not necessarily a deal killer for your biggest hit, because it holds up great and still gets radio play. But she didn't write Because the Night. Bruce Springsteen wrote Because the Night. Because the Night. So it's not supposed to be a list of Jan Wenner's famous friends, but it appeared to be. So who should be there instead of Patti Smith? How about Diana Ross? Now, Diana Ross is technically in. She was part of the Supremes, and the Supremes are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But why is it that only men are allowed to be inducted twice? All the Beatles are in there for their solo career and being part of the Beatles. Rod Stewart's in there twice. Eric Clapton's in there twice. There's several examples of that. Why not Diana Ross? Patti Smith had one song reach #13, her biggest hit. Diana Ross had 6 #1 hits and 12 top 10 hits. Upside Down is still on my cardio playlist when I go to the gym. People still swoon over that song, Endless Love. I don't love it, but it's, endlessly love it, but, it's certainly an enduring hit, and she has a lot of those. And she certainly deserves to be inducted over Patti Smith. #3. Del Shannon. I'll ask the same question with all of them. What's your third favorite Del Shannon song? I know what your favorite Del Shannon song is, because he's only had one. It was called Runaway, and it's great. But that's it for the official criteria. Now, Del Shannon shot himself and, committed suicide. And, it sounds very callous of me, and I'm sorry that, I feel a lot of pain for people that killed themselves. As of the day we're taping this, it's less than a week since Sinead O'Connor passed away. And, I'm just assuming that suicide was the reason for that. And I'm very sad about that. But that doesn't mean that you get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Tom Petty was a big proponent of Del Shannon getting in the Hall of Fame, and he's friends with Jan. Tom Petty references him in the song Running Down a Dream, which is great. Me and Del were singing a little Runaway, and I think that was a big help. But one song does not get you in there. Who has more than one song? Who should replace Del Shannon? Well, we'll stick with the theme of solo artists that should be in for their solo work. How about Phil Collins? Phil's already in there as part of Genesis. He has the Del Shannon qualification of having one iconic song, which of course is In the Air Tonight. In the Air Tonight has the biggest, greatest drum bridge of all time for any song. It still can get a room of people anywhere in the world to, and that's great. But In the Air Tonight is only Phil Collins' 16th best-selling song. It peaked at number 19. In terms of radio play, I'm sure it's a lot higher. It's still in heavy radio rotation. But Phil Collins, as a solo artist, apart from Genesis, has had 7 #1 hits and 14 top 10s. That means he should be in there ahead of Del Shannon, who only has 1 song you've heard of. Okay, now we're going to get into the real head scratchers. Number 2, the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. Now that sounds like a Hall of Famer, of course, but is it? What's your 3rd favorite Paul Butterfield Blues Band song? Let me ask you another question. Can you name a single Paul Butterfield Blues Band song? How in the hell are they in there? They've had no #1s, no top 10s, no top 40s. Not because they're like the Grateful Dead, who are an album band and hasn't released many singles. The Paul Butterfield Blues Band has released tons of singles, and none of them really got that close to the top 40. I'm sure they were good live. It sounds like the kind of band's like, hey, you want to go see the Paul Butterfield Blues Band tonight? And, your instincts to go, yeah, that sounds great. It sounds great, but is it? You don't know any of their songs. Their lineup, I think another reason they're in the Hall of Fame is their lineup. It constantly changed. There have been more people in Paul Butterfield Blues Band than there have been in Chicago. And that should be a negative in the selection for the Hall of Fame, but I'm sure it's a positive. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. Because you look, a lot of those people, when you look like on Wikipedia, their names are in blue, meaning they have a Wikipedia page of their own. That's not necessarily a sign of fame and worthiness, but it is a sign that these people have friends who vote. One of them is close friends with Paul Schaefer, who's a voter. And I'm sure there's many other examples. They're respected musicians. They have friends who vote, and inexplicably, there is a band with no songs anybody has ever heard of in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame who should be instead Styx. Styx has one statistic that should be an automatic, sort of like in baseball, every single player who has 3,000 hits or 500 home runs, unless they got it from steroids, is in the Hall of Fame. This should get you in the Hall of Fame. Styx is the first band, not the Beatles, not the Stones, not the Who, not Led Zeppelin. Styx is the first band to have 4 multi-platinum albums in a row. That's longevity. And in fact, only one of those, Cornerstone, did not go triple platinum. So Styx has both albums that sell a lot and singles that are still iconic. Styx is one of the bands with Foreigner and REO Speedwagon that are in that period of time that he just doesn't like, and he's stated that they're never going to be nominated. One of the things that Jan Wenner will do, and this should tell you something, is he will nominate all of the bands that have opened for Styx over the years. Now, if you're a certain age, you remember Styx was the biggest band in the world over the course of 2 albums. Paradise Theater and Kilroy was here. The success of Kilroy was here destroyed the band, but over those 2 tours, they were so big, they didn't even have an opening act, which is almost unheard of. And so other than those 2 tours, they did have opening acts. So let's talk about them. There are some that are on Jan Wenner's I Don't Like list that are still very famous, like Foreigner, REO Speedwagon, and Bad Company is open for them. But then there's a long list of people who are either in the Hall of Fame or at least have been nominated for the Hall of Fame. These are the bands that have opened for Styx. I wrote them down here. Aerosmith, Kiss, Blue Oyster Cult, Journey, Foghat, Bob Seger, Rush, Thin Lizzy, Kansas, Cheap Trick, Eddie Money, The Cars, Boston, Ted Nugent, Heart, Joe Walsh, Pat Benatar, and Peter Frampton. Pretty good list of people who have opened for Styx, and I'm not including people who, like AC/DC, who in their early career just opened for Styx a couple of times and then they blew up and were their own act. There's several of those that are not included. Why is Styx not in the Hall of Fame? It is not even a well-kept secret. Everybody knows Styx is not in the Hall of Fame because of the song Mr. Roboto, which was a huge hit, but critics destroyed it and it broke up the band because it was following Paradise Theater, which is considered one of the great rock and roll records of all time, and then all of a sudden there's a guy using a robot voice on a song. I'd like to point out a couple of things. Mr. Roboto still holds up. By the way, listen to the lyrics. Everything that Dennis DeYoung wrote in that song is true now. It is all happening with AI, and he was warning that these electronic advances, these tech advances seem like, improvements to our lives, but will actually ruin us. And that appears to be happening. So that should count for something. It was such a bad scene for Styx that it broke up the band, at least in terms of the lead singer, Dennis DeYoung, leaving. They replaced him with a guy who sounds a lot like him, but they didn't do Mr. Roboto in concert for like 20 years. And then as a joke, for like one split second, and I was at this concert, their opening acts were Billy Squier and Bad Company. Styx was the main event, and after one break, for like a split second, the lights come on, and there's a guy in the Mr. Roboto suit, and then the lights go off. And we know now they meant it as sort of like they were curious as to whether people would laugh or boo. What happened instead was a deafening roar. The crowd went absolutely ballistic. This seems sacrilege because obviously like Renegade and Come Sail Away and Lady and Blue Collar Man and Fooling Yourself and Rockin' the Paradise, all those are better songs than Mr. Roboto. But I guess because they hadn't done it in 20 years, it got a bigger pop than Renegade or Come Sail Away for that one couple of seconds. And they decided, hey, they're never getting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so now they do it in concert and it gets some of the biggest reactions. Look at their success. 8 top 10 hits, 16 top 40 hits, and for 50 years, they have been main eventing concerts and future or current Rock and Roll Hall of Famers have been opening for them. The omission of Styx in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a disgrace, and that fact alone invalidates the Hall in general. But there's worse. How could it be worse than the Paul Butterfield Blues Band being in and Styx not? Number 1 is Laura Nyro. What is your third favorite Laura Nyro song? I'll make it easier. Name one Laura Nyro song. No? Laura Nyro is in because if she was a book, she would be Ulysses or Atlas Shrugged. There is a lot of people, heavy hitters like Elton John, who say they are fans of hers, and it makes them seem very avant-garde and intelligent. Are they actually listening to Laura Nyro songs? I don't know. She did write a couple of songs that maybe you've heard. Songs, sorry about that, so rude, my phone on, oh my God. Maybe you've heard of. She wrote a song for the Fifth Dimension called Stone Soul Picnic. She basically likes to write songs with stone in the title. She wrote a song called Stony End for Barbra Streisand. Those are the only 2 songs that it's even conceivable that you've heard. So why is she in the Hall of Fame? Well, number 1, she's a cool person. A lot of people say they're into her. Elton John said that she's the best artist that nobody's ever heard of, but it's the Hall of Fame and nobody's ever heard of her. That should be enough. Of course, she has the 2 main qualifications. Jan Wenner likes her, and she died of cancer, tragically at an earlier age, and even sadder, she wrote several songs about her mom dying of cancer, and the same cancer took her own life. And that is sad, and I don't want to come off as callous or dick or whatever. And I'm sorry that she's gone. And cancer is, my wife's done a lot of research. Cancer is definitely the way I'm leaving this earth. But does Laura Nyro deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame instead of, wait for it, Mariah Carey. Now, I'm not a fan of Mariah's, but it should be astonishing to you that she is not in the Hall of Fame. I like All I Want for Christmas. I don't want to seem like an anti-Christmas guy. You know, I'm not saying she's bad. I'm just saying I don't like her personally, and I'm not a big fan of her songs. But the reason she is not in the Hall of Fame is outrageous. It's like the Barry Bonds rule. Jan Wenner, growing up, just like me, for the longest time it was always Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron, the top 2 home run titles of all time, and then Barry Bonds comes through, is not nearly as good as them, takes a bunch of steroids and intrudes on that list, and that is outrageous. For songs, it was #1 songs. Beatles were always #1. They have 20 #1 songs. Elvis, #2 at 18, and then Mariah Carey comes along with 19 #1 songs and intrude that list. Jan Wenner feels that Mariah Carey should never be spoken in the same breath as the Beatles or Elvis, and I get his point, but to keep her out of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with 19 #1 songs is crazy and vindictive and just kind of smells of misogyny, to be honest with you. I mean, the Beatles she doesn't deserve to be up there with the Beatles and Elvis. If only 2 of those 3 get inducted, she should not be. The Beatles are the greatest band of all time. Elvis Presley's the king of rock and roll. I get it. But you don't have only 2 slots. Laura Nyro and the Paul Butterfield Blues Band are in the Hall of Fame, and Mariah Carey isn't. Is it just those #1 songs? It's not. She has the most weeks at #1 for any musical artist at 90, unless you combine Paul McCartney's solo work with his work with the Beatles. But in terms of individual artists, she's #1. Her songs have been #1 for 90 weeks. Longevity, let's look at that. Her first #1 was 1990 with Vision of Love. Her last #1 was 2022 with All I Want for Christmas. Is that good longevity? Having 19 #1 songs over the course of 23 years? Should that get you in the Hall of Fame? Well, it doesn't get you into the worst Hall of Fame there has ever been. A vanity ego project for Jan Wenner, and he should be ashamed of himself. We'll see you next week on Top 5 Friday. If you want a Top 5 list, you just go ahead and request it, and we will give you credit. In fact, this list is the credit for Maurice. Maurice is funny because he watched the top 5, or I guess listened to in his car, which is one way you can watch these videos, top 5 television dramas of all time, and reported that he had not seen a single episode of either of them. But he is a big music fan, so we're doing a list that he can relate to. And we will see you next time on The 4 Chains, baby. Did I just spit in the camera? Jesus Christ.